When they showed the story on the news, I started screaming. I had to literally get up and walk away from the television.
He was the brother I didn't have but always wanted, and I didn't have him for long enough.
It's very rare, obviously, to get surveillance footage of an actual murder.
They don't get any money. They didn't gain anything out of what they did. It was just senseless.
The trail became cold, and we were desperate for a lead.
Investigators wanted to dust the counter for prints, but everybody that comes in there could touch that counter.
The culprits are either going to mess up, or somebody gets in trouble and wants a deal to help.
It's fall 2004 in Richland County, a sprawling region in the center of South Carolina. 24-year-old Willard Grandstaff is hard at work at the Kangaroo Express convenience store.
He worked all the time. It seemed like he never had a day off. I'm Lexi Reister, and I'm Will's cousin. Will ran the cash register at the Kangaroo. He cleaned and front-faced the shelves. He would stock the coolers. He would count the safe down and make sure the drawers were whatever their drawers were supposed to be. When Will did anything, he always did it wholeheartedly. He was a little bit of a workaholic. He never complained about the store, and he never complained about going into work. It's like the store became a friend to him. My mom and my dad were managers, and they ended up training Will. The only thing I can ever remember is Will at the Kangaroo. He worked at the Kangaroo literally his whole adult life.
When Willard isn't working, he enjoys spending time with his close-knit family.
There's about a 16-year age difference. He was just out of high school when I was turning 3. So I remember doing the little sister bugging him thing. Will and I lived with my parents and my aunt, Will's mom. Will's mother is one of the sweetest women ever. She practically raised me. I called her Mama Sue for the longest time. She's still my Mama Sue at heart.
At a young age, Sue began overcoming adversity when she was diagnosed with a severe hearing disability.
From the time I was a very young girl, I always felt isolated because of the fact that I couldn't hear. So I taught myself how to read. Disability was not well known until I turned 18.
In April of 1980, Sue's world gets a new addition when she welcomes her first child, Willard.
He was born at 11:57 a.m. on April 6th, which was Easter Sunday, 1980. We were close-knit. He was funny. He was always the child that anytime I said no, he couldn't do this, couldn't do that, I went ahead and did it anyway.
He was a very sweet, a very friendly, mostly introverted person. He liked just the little geeky things. The video games. He did read the Harry Potter books as they came out. He was a huge nerd.
In 1996, at the age of 16, Willard and his family moved to South Carolina.
I am Robert Cribb. I got to know Willard Grandstaff at high school in the spring of 1996. I was coming out of my class one day, and I saw this boy standing there, and I said, I'm going over and speak to him. He looks like something's bugging him. So I walked up to him, and he said, Hi, I'm Willard Grandstaff. Can I have lunch with you? That's how we became good friends, and we became inseparable.
As the friendship evolves, Robert comes to Willard's defense.
Just before the bell rang for us to go into the class, me and Will were standing there talking, and a bully just come up to him and just shove him. Well, I went to the nearest assistant principal, and I told him, I said, he needs to stop.
The bullying continues, so Willard finds solace in his favorite pastime.
He loved martial arts. Him and I would get together, and he would show me different martial arts moves that he knew. Him and I would study our martial arts.
He'd have gone toe-to-toe with anybody that threatened us. He was very protective, so if you mattered to him, he would definitely protect you at all costs.
During his senior year, Willard begins working at the Kangaroo Express.
He took pride in the store. He made a lot of friends. He knew a lot of the customers that came in during the 11 to 7 shift. He took pride in knowing some of the customers by name.
Oh, he loved it. I would go in there and help him stack the totes up outside, and then we'd sit in a chair and carry on conversation all night long.
While working at the gas station, Willard dreams about what the future holds.
He was waiting for the winter session of the community college to start. He was going to sign up.
When he got paid, he would put money aside to save his tuition. He wanted to go to Millen's Tech and become a computer engineer. Will had plans to better himself.
One evening in late September, Willard prepares for his standard overnight shift at the Kangaroo Express.
I took him to work that night. Will never did like to drive. I didn't mind driving him to work. I guess that's a happy memory that I can hang on to.
Sue drops off her son, unaware that this is the last time she will see him alive.
I'm Investigator Brian Metz from the Richland County Sheriff's Office. Just after midnight, the morning of September the 28th, 2004, two ladies had stopped to get gas at the Kangaroo station on Garners Ferry Road. And they found the clerk on the floor. With blood around his head.
Critical clues buried in Willard's final moments.
The accomplice was laying in wait. They knew he was somewhere.
An inside tip suggests a surprising motive.
To go take that next step into murder is unusual.
It's starting to look like there was some type of beef or argument with Willard.
And an unlikely witness unlocks the crime.
In this particular case, he was at one tip that possibly changes everything.
On September 27th, 2004, while 24-year-old Willard Grandstaff prepared for work, he spoke to his best friend in one of his final moments.
I told him, I said, Will, you don't need to go to work. I got a funny feeling something's going to happen. I don't like Will to be out working after dark because I don't trust people out there. He said, Robert, I have to go to work. There's nobody that can work my shift for me. But Willard didn't have a lazy bone in his body. Well, I couldn't talk him out of it, and he went to work. He said, I'll call you at 12:30 a.m. to let you know that I made it to work safe. Well, 12 midnight come, 12:30 came. I'm laying in the bed waiting for the call. My phone never rings.
While Cribb waited to hear from Willard, Richland County Sheriff's officers responded to the 911 call from the Kangaroo Express.
I'm J. Stan Smith, Deputy Chief of the Richland County Sheriff's Department's Criminal Investigative Division. The individuals were obviously in a state of shock, what they had seen when they arrived at the store. But they immediately called 911, and we had EMS summoned to the scene, looked for signs of life. But the individual had passed away. Crime scene investigators became involved at that point.
The sergeant on duty briefed myself and spoke to the two people who had reported it. After that, we began the investigation. So when we go inside, we see the clerk on the floor in front of the counter and blood around his head and what appeared to be a gunshot wound to his head. A wound like that looks like it's pretty close up. You know, we're talking point blank. There could be a lot of explanations for that. Maybe somebody was mad at him. Did somebody have a big beef with him or hatred for him?
The victim had identification on him, and we were able to make contact with the management of the store relatively quickly. So we confirmed his identity through management.
We were able to identify that the clerk was Willard Grandstaff. Willard's uncle was manager at the store, and he assisted us while we were there. It's never good to have a person as young as Willard die. It's never easy on a family when something like this happens.
I busted out crying and screaming and yelling and hitting everybody that came anywhere near me because I didn't want to believe it.
I went into a severe, deep depression. I didn't want to do anything, and all I wanted to do was be with him.
I was 6 when Will died. He was my absolute best friend. I don't know if I truly had a concept of death at that time, but I knew he wasn't coming home.
To piece together what happened to Willard, investigators and crime scene technicians processed the scene.
Some of the display racks in front of the counter had been knocked over. Appeared to have been some type of struggle. The crime scene unit informed us that they had found a .380 caliber shell casing.
The shell casing, that's very significant in any investigation because, first of all, it tells you what gun you're looking for, and then ultimately, if you recovered a weapon, you could match it ballistically to the shell casing.
After bagging the casing, investigators spot something in the storeroom.
It's very rare to get surveillance footage of an actual murder. A convenience store would be a good opportunity where you do have surveillance video to show thefts and things of that nature. In this particular instance, there was video, and so the efforts were made to collect and secure the surveillance video, hoping that it would shed light on the identities of the perpetrators.
We could see that Willard was doing cleanup in the store and then had gone to the back of the store to stock the coolers. He was busy doing his job. Shortly before midnight, 2 males come in, larger male and a smaller male. Both of them are dressed in darker clothes. Their faces are covered. Both of them are carrying handguns. The larger male is an African-American male. The other one was hard to tell, not enough skin showing. He could have been a light-skinned African-American. He could have been white.
The 2 suspects separated in the store. The accomplice was over behind a rack. They obviously did not see Willard when they first came in. They knew he was somewhere, and they figured he would emerge.
So the lighter skinned male goes behind the counter to the cash register, and then there was like a back office. He looked like he was looking probably for the clerk. The heavier set male stands in front of the counter, I guess more like a lookout.
Police continue watching as the masked gunmen move through the store before Willard suddenly emerges.
Willard seemed to be pretty calm. The heavy-set male started demanding money from him and telling him to put his hands on the counter. So Willard refuses to do what he says and gets struck by the heavier-set male. The other male then comes from behind the counter, jumps over the counter, and basically falls, knocking over some things. And then Willard is able to get back to his feet.
They are sort of incredulous as to his refusal.
No! You heard me, no!
And that's when the shooter takes a look out the front door. And shoots Willard in the head. The two immediately turned to the door and walked out. They didn't run out, they walked out. It was sort of an impulse reaction, sort of like, I'm going to show you type thing, is the impression I got from looking at the video. Willard was very brave to do what he did. You don't know the mindset of the person holding the gun. They're desperate. They're unpredictable. Willard was a true innocent victim. He was minding his own business. He had a job. He was trying to contribute to society. He didn't deserve to have this happen to him.
While rewatching Willard's final moments, Metz catches a glimpse of something of interest through the store window.
Shortly after they leave, you can see an older model pickup ride through the front parking lot right past the front door. We thought that might not be coincidence.
When reviewing surveillance footage of Willard Grandstaff's murder, investigators spot a truck leaving the scene. Could this vehicle be the key to identifying the killers?
It was believed it could be the suspect vehicle because of the short time between it circling through and the two suspects entering the store. So in the absence of other information, we had to believe that truck was in play.
It's almost too good to be true that it's a coincidence that they just happened to ride through at that point.
As detectives collect information on the pickup truck, they notice something intriguing at the beginning of the encounter.
I am Rita Schuler, retired special agent with the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. Another very important thing that the investigators saw was when the slender guy jumped over the counter, he jumped and his palm touched the counter. And they figured, we may be able to dust the counter and get a palm print that we could possibly lead back to him.
And we processed the counter area very deliberately in hopes that would produce a latent print or DNA that would help solve this case.
While awaiting results from forensics, something about this crime isn't sitting right with investigator Metz.
The one thing that got me was just the callousness of the way he was shot. It was totally uncalled for. There was no reason behind this.
After they shoot Willard, they leave the store. They don't get any money. They didn't gain anything out of what they did. It was just senseless.
The close-range nature of the shooting leads Metz to reconsider an earlier theory from the crime scene.
When you're looking at a case like this, you have to look at if there was anybody that had some type of beef or argument with Willard.
An individual may come in and try to steal a 12-pack of beer, but to go take that next step and to murder the clerk is unusual.
Investigators question Willard's co-workers and find out a surprising piece of information.
When we looked at possible suspects, we learned from management that Willard had thwarted a previous attempt to steal money out of the register. In this particular instance, he was successful in defending the store at that point in time. We found that video and we worked on that to see if maybe that individual came back and wanted to retaliate.
Investigators compare the features of Willard's assailants to the footage of the prior robbery attempt.
We take a close look at him, look at his height, his weight, but his physical characteristics didn't match.
Despite the dead end, investigators believe that the close encounter provides insight into Willard's mindset the night he was murdered.
It told us a lot about Willard as a person. He was proud of his job and may have given him confidence to stand up against these other two guys. He was not afraid. We got to believe that maybe he was bolstered some by his previous efforts to defend the store.
4 days after the murder, on October 2nd, Willard Grandstaff is laid to rest.
I was a pallbearer at his funeral. I walked up to his body, and I'm screaming, "No, stop, don't do this, wake up, let's go home." And I sat down and finally got myself together, and his mom said, "Robert, you need to let him go. He's at rest now. The good Lord needed him for something besides here."
We would play pretend games. I remember one time he got me a ring pop and it was the magic ring. I was like a princess and he was the knight. It was cute. He was the brother I didn't have but always wanted. And I didn't have him for long enough.
I think everybody remembers him in their own way. Me, I like to remember him as an infant in my arms and that I helped him grow up. The only thing I could tell the police was just to get this son of a bitches.
In the weeks after the murder, the case is at a standstill.
We just were basically stymied in the early part of this investigation. When you have a case like this where your investigation has really turned cold kind of quickly, you're just desperately looking for similar crimes, trends involving maybe a weapon of the same caliber, things of that nature. Unfortunately, we have a lot of convenience store robberies. Anybody that we learned about that's committing violent armed robberies and shooting people would have been subjects of interest in this investigation. We had to look at everything.
Investigators then get a call with a promising tip.
Another agency gave us lead on some people that were committing some other burglaries in the area at the time.
Shamik and Prince. The half-brothers were on the radar because they had been in the South during that time period.
Investigators reach out to all police agencies in the area, gathering as much information about their new lead.
They definitely had violent things in their criminal histories. They're buying and selling guns, and they could have possibly been in the area. There are two people we're going to have to look at.
While investigators in the Willard Grandstaff murder wait for detailed reports on their new suspects, they re-examine forensic evidence collected at the scene to see if there is a link.
The forensic unit is pretty much looking for everything, and of course, the main things is fingerprints.
Well, when you examine the surveillance video, obviously you're interested in surfaces that may have been touched. DNA is so sophisticated now that skin cell tissue can leave what we call touch DNA.
But it's very hard when it's a public store like this. Everybody that comes in there could touch that counter.
You basically get a mixture of DNA that's unidentifiable exclusively to one person, and it's virtually impossible to isolate it.
I'm John Metters, and I was in charge of the prosecution in the murder of Willard Grandstaff. Unfortunately, there weren't forensics, there wasn't DNA, there weren't fingerprints. There may have been one partial palm print, but was not something that law enforcement could use.
With no viable forensic evidence, detectives reach back out to the agency that provided the tip.
At that point, we'd deal with investigators. We would have them take full body pictures, showing tattoos or anything, and then you start doing a comparison there to see if things match up.
Investigators' search for the suspects takes a turn when they receive a new update.
We find out at the same time as Willard was killed. The half-brothers were incarcerated in another state. Both of them were caught up north somewhere. At that point, they were eliminated because we knew they were committing crimes at other places at the time that this murder occurred.
The trail became cold, and we were desperate for a lead. We were at a dead end.
Months after Willard's murder, the investigation is at a standstill, and his family is still on edge.
After Will was murdered, I know that my parents made extra sure to lock the doors and double check before they ever went to go do anything. I think they were worried. My mom worked at the store. I wanted my mom to come home. I didn't want her to get hurt. I worried a lot that someone else was gonna die. I try not to think about that store, ever.
With little else to go on, investigators make a bold move.
The sheriff's department decides to air this footage on the news, the local news channels in Columbia, in hopes that someone may identify the suspects or even identify this truck.
When you release surveillance video or you make an appeal to the public, you'll take information from whatever source it comes.
But not everyone is excited about the release of the surveillance video.
I remember they brought the video over, but they wouldn't let me watch it because I was a child, and so to this day I've still never seen the video.
When they showed the story on the news, I started screaming. I had to literally get up and walk away from the television. I started crying. I miss him. I wish he was still here.
Days became weeks, weeks became months. During that time, law enforcement was working on it. They were getting leads, they were running down leads. They were still showing the video periodically, keeping it out to the public. But in cases like this, where you don't have a witness, what usually happens is that somebody out there, the culprits are either going to talk and mess up, or somebody gets in trouble and wants a deal to help.
In March 2006, their luck begins to change.
One of our narcotics agents had made an arrest of an individual named Chris Ellis, who had several priors involving narcotics violations, and this was going to be one that could create some serious problems for him based on his prior convictions. This individual reached out to the narcotics agent who was involved in his case, indicated to him he had significant knowledge about this murder. That was passed on to my lead detective and myself.
Investigators agree to sit down with Ellis, who is currently incarcerated at the county jail. They begin by asking about his whereabouts around the time of the murder.
Chris Ellis tells us that he's at home the next morning and that the shooter comes back to the house and gives him the gun and asks him to get rid of the gun for him. And described to him what had gone on, which matched up with what had gone on at the Kangaroo with Willard.
He had specific details about the actual crime itself. He knew the actual caliber of the weapon involved, which is very significant.
There's one way to find out if Chris Ellis is telling the truth.
After Chris's initial statement, we polygraphed Chris.
A cold case may go back on the shelf, but there's always a possibility of pulling it back off when something new comes in. In this particular case, Chris was at one tip that possibly changes everything.
Investigators in the Willard Grandstaff murder case are trying to determine if a prison informant named Chris Ellis is lying.
It's very commonplace for individuals who are incarcerated to try to gain some advantage by helping solve crime. But Chris Ellis failed a polygraph. And what he was lying to us about was who was the heavier set accomplice. Well, after he failed a polygraph, he came clean about the involvement of his cousin, Lamont Ellis.
According to Chris, his cousin was the accomplice to the shooter.
Chris Ellis did not want to implicate his cousin, Lamont Ellis. That was the most significant mistruth that he had initially. Once we got through that, we were able to verify what he was telling us.
What helped make him credible in my mind was that he was telling on a family member, which is not easy to do.
Investigators push for the identity of the killer.
Jaime Marrero is who Chris Ellis identified as the shooter. When we started checking into Jaime Marrero, we realized he had a violent history. He had been involved in another shooting, homicide, several years back where he was actually shot.
Things are falling into place like none of the other leads had.
Investigators compare Jaime Marrero and Lamont Ellis to the masked gunman in the surveillance video.
The video was able to show their body height, structure, and type, and it did match. It was a key piece of evidence, without question.
Jaime matches up to the smaller guy, and Lamont definitely matches up with the larger male.
The two individuals matched the physical description of the two suspects to a T.
Investigators ask Ellis about the pickup truck seen in the video.
We find out from Chris that the truck had nothing to do with the case. We never were able to identify who was in the truck, but they were in one of their relatives' car and had been driving it that night.
Now, to build a case against Marrero and Ellis, investigators zero in on a piece of potential evidence.
According to Chris Ellis, Jaime Marrero came to his house, asked him to get rid of the gun. Chris told me that he had thrown the gun in a pond in the lower part of the county in a rural area. He had some connection in that pond because of a relative living close by.
I went to the pond with law enforcement and Richland County divers. I learned ponds are some of the toughest thing to dive for because you can't see.
We searched that pond for days, but were not able to recover it.
Desperate for more evidence, investigators attempt to leverage their best asset.
When you have a crime like this, with a lack of forensic evidence or ballistics, and you've got somebody that's giving you a tip that's acquainted with the suspects, a pretext phone call is an investigative technique that is often used. It's a call that we record, and we attempt to get either a confession over the phone or acknowledgement to the crime.
We set up a patch call where Chris called Jaime Marrero to see if Jaime's going to say anything incriminating.
Christopher was able to get Jaime on the phone, and Jaime basically said, why are you doing this? Why are you talking to me about this on the telephone?
If you called me and asked me about a homicide and was implicating me as saying that, tell me about what happened, I'd be telling you, I don't know, I wasn't there. And that's not what Jaime was saying.
Which, in our view, was basically an acknowledgement, which was very significant.
The content of the conversation corroborated Chris' information immediately. And that was significant to Chris's credibility.
Then, the attention shifts to a different member of the Ellis family.
Chris's girlfriend at the time was cooperative in the investigation, and she had some degree of influence on Lamont.
Of course, Lamont finds out from the others that he's being given up. Communication is made with Lamont, who then calls into the sheriff's department and offers to come in to the sheriff's department.
Lamont Ellis sits down with investigators to share insight into exactly how and why Willard died.
That night, they had gone out to a pool hall that was right behind the Kangaroo. When they left there, Jaime was talking about doing the robbery.
But according to Lamont, when Willard resisted, Marrero lost his cool.
Lamont was pretty much upset that Jaime had shot the guy, said that was not necessary.
After we got Lamont Ellis's statement and he fully corroborated Christopher's tip, that was enough for us to secure arrest warrants for Jaime Marrero.
Willard's family is pleased with investigators' progress, but they find some of the case details shocking.
The accomplice that was arrested, Lamont, my mom knew his mom and had kind of seen him grow up. So everyone was kind of surprised to hear that Lamont was involved.
In a strange coincidence, Robert Cribb believes the events of August 4th were not Willard and Lamont's first encounter.
Lamont was in Will's class. He pushed Will outside, and I said, no, Lamont, you need to stop and leave him alone. When they told me they had caught the killers, I felt relieved. I felt Will got the peace he deserved.
Lamont Ellis is charged with assault and robbery. Jaime Marrero is charged with the murder of Willard Grandstaff. His trial is set for September 2008.
This was a murder. This was a cold-blooded murder, and he needed to be convicted of that.
On September 22, 2008, the trial for the murder of Willard Grandstaff begins. But there's a problem.
I've been doing this a long time. And I love what I do. I love doing this job. But this case was not an easy case. There just was not any evidence, no forensics, no DNA. It was a tough case for law enforcement to crack, no question about it.
Without something directly linking him to the murder, prosecutors fear Marrero will walk.
We don't stop the investigation when the arrest takes place. We obviously wanted to build as strong a case as possible.
One of the other significant parts of the investigation post-arrest were some jailhouse phone calls. One of those calls, Mr. Jaime Marrero was talking to his girlfriend, and as a result of that, law enforcement went and talked to her. She said that he had confessed to her. Law enforcement obviously was excited at that news.
Just days into the trial, the prosecution's new star witness takes the stand.
You know, some folks are just credible. They just reek with credibility. And her testimony was powerful. And I can visually remember looking at Marrero, and he was actually slipping down in his seat as she was testifying. And he felt it. And I know the jury felt it. And it was just strong, credible evidence. I'm so glad she came forward. It was a good circumstantial evidence case. With her testimony, it really took it up a notch, too.
After her testimony, Jaime's lawyer asked the judge for a break. Jaime wanted to speak to family members, and after a period of time, he made what appeared to be a very emotional decision to plead guilty to murder and attempted armed robbery.
I told the judge at the trial, these guys have deprived me of a future as well as my son. I said, the only thing I want you to do is deprive them of their future.
Lamont Ellis is sentenced to 5 years for conspiracy and 10 years for assault. Jaime Marrero is sentenced to 38 years in prison for the murder of Willard Grandstaff.
A plea to murder is a little bit unusual because murder carries a minimum of 30 in South Carolina to life. It's what we call pine box life. So securing a murder conviction, a non-parolable offense, and then getting 38 years, we felt pretty good about that.
That video, it'll always be with you. You can never forget it. I actually ride by the Kangaroo every day going to my job and look over there and think about this case every day.
Willard's family remember the young man who in his final moments gave his life to protect the place that he loved.
He showed love to everybody that came in contact with him. I've always been proud of my son. Everything he's done, everything that he wanted to accomplish but didn't have a chance to. Yeah, I've always been proud of him for wanting to be something. But one regret that I have is that he's no longer around for me to continue being the proud mother. I love you. And still wish you was here with me, but it can't be.
Still to this day gets to me. Knowing that I miss him every day, to wish he was still here to talk to me. I'll walk up to his grave and I'll say, hey, Will, I'll miss you. I wish you were still here so we could go hang out somewhere, go get something to eat somewhere or something. And I could literally feel like he's putting his arm around me, telling me, hey, buddy, how are you? I'm right here with you. And then within 2 seconds, it's gone. I guess it's a way of telling me, hey, I'm here. I'm glad to see you. I'm doing okay. And I'll believe that till my dying day.
If I could do anything, I'd want to give him a hug. I miss his hugs. I still remember his hugs. He gave bear hugs, and they were just the best hugs. He's the person you would have wanted to be friends with. I like how my aunt put it on his headstone. He was a gentle soul. That's what he was. Big friendly giant.